In the year 1887, Galveston, Texas, was a city caught between progress and desperation. Industry was booming, but so was poverty. That year, Texas faced one of its harshest droughts in decades. Crops had failed, livestock was dying. Families, broken by debt and despair, were forced into choices no parent should ever have to make. And one of those choices led them to a dusty warehouse near the port, where children were being sold like cattle. That's where our story begins. Samuel McKinnon stood quietly in the shadows of that warehouse, his hat gripped tight in his weathered hands. He was 42 years old, owner of one of the largest cattle ranches in Brazos County. From the outside, it seemed like he had everything. But inside, he was hollowed out by a slow ache that had no name. 15 years of trying and failing to have a child with his wife Martha had carved invisible scars into both their souls. The house was too quiet. The land was full of life, but the home felt barren. That day, Samuel hadn't come looking for a child. He came to town for supplies, maybe a few extra hands to help on the ranch. But fate has a way of showing up when you're not ready for it. The auctioneer's voice sliced through the still air. "Next up, girl, age 14, strong, good with animals, been working the cotton field since she was 8, can read and write some." A thin girl was pushed forward onto the platform. Her brown hair hung in tangled curls, and her dress was more patch than fabric. But it wasn't her clothes or her posture that caught Samuel's attention. It was her eyes. They weren't empty, hollow eyes of a child beaten down by life. They were sharp, watching, calculating, not with fear, but with survival. It was the look of someone who'd already lived through more than most grown men. Eyes that didn't just see, they measured. The bidding started low. $20, $25. A few local farmers tossed in half-hearted offers. One of them, Thomas Briggs, had a reputation for working kids into the dirt and feeding them little more than scraps. Samuel glanced at him. Then, without even fully realizing what he was doing, he stepped forward and called out, $50. The warehouse fell silent. $50 could feed a family of 6 for months. It was more than most of those kids would earn in 2 years of hard labor. The auctioneer blinked in surprise, but recovered quickly. "50 from the gentleman in the back. Do I hear 60? No one dared speak. Samuel McKinnon had spoken, and when he made up his mind, folks knew better to challenge him. "Sold!" As he walked to the front, Samuel caught the girl's eye, and what he saw made him pause. It wasn't fear, wasn't gratitude, it was pity. That girl, who had just been sold like cattle, was looking at him with pity, and for a second, Samuel felt something in his chest crack. The auctioneer handed over a slip of paper. "Rebecca Sullivan," it read. "Parents died of fever last winter. She's been on her own ever since." Up close, Samuel could see how fragile she was. Her wrists were thin as twigs. Her shoes had holes that let her toes peek through. But there was a steadiness in how she stood, a kind of unshakable presence. He tipped his hat politely. "Miss Sullivan, I'm Samuel McKinnon. You'll be coming to work on my ranch." She studied him a long moment, then asked quietly, "What kind of work?" "General help around the house and barn. My wife Martha will explain more." Rebecca's next words stopped him in his tracks. "And what if I don't want to come?" Samuel blinked. No other child had questioned it that day, not one. Most just nodded in silence, eyes down. But not this girl. "You have a choice," he said slowly, "but winter's coming, and the streets of Galveston aren't kind to young folks on their own." She looked around, at the children still waiting to be sold, at the men with hungry eyes clutching their coins. Then she looked back at him. "I reckon I'll come with you then, Mr. McKinnon." The ride back to the ranch took most of the day. Rebecca didn't say much, but she watched everything. The horses, the road, the position of the sun. Samuel noticed. "You planning to run off?" she asked after a while. "Depends," she replied. calm, unafraid. On what? On whether you bought me to work or for other reasons. Those words hit him like a punch to the gut. He stopped the wagon and looked her in the eye. Miss Sullivan, let me be clear. You're coming to work. Honest work. Any man who would hurt a child should be strung up. I include myself in that judgment. She looked at him, measured again, then nodded. All right then. By the time they crested the last hill and the ranch came into view, the sun was low on the horizon, painting the land gold. Rebecca leaned forward. It's bigger than I expected, she said softly. Samuel nodded. Took me 20 years to build it up. Of course, it'll all go to strangers when I'm gone. Martha and I were never blessed with children. Rebecca said nothing, but Samuel noticed something flicker in her expression, something unreadable. When they pulled up to the house, Martha came out to greet them. She was still beautiful, but years of disappointment had left lines around her eyes. Still, when she saw Rebecca, her expression softened. My lord, child, you look like you haven't eaten in weeks. She probably hasn't, Samuel said quietly. From that moment, something began to shift, not just for Rebecca, but for all of them. Samuel thought he was saving a child, but he didn't know yet that child was about to save him. And that's where the real story begins. When Rebecca Sullivan stepped down from the wagon that first evening, she didn't know what to expect. She'd just been bought like livestock at a labor auction, traded for $50 and a promise of honest work. And now she stood before a ranch that stretched wider than anything she'd ever seen. Rolling pastures, cattle in the distance, and a house big enough to lose yourself in. To a 14-year-old who'd lived most of her life with nothing but hunger and fear, it might have felt like a miracle. But Rebecca wasn't the type to believe in miracles. Inside the house, Martha McKinnon took one look at the ragged girl and rushed forward with a mother's instinct. She didn't see a stray. She didn't see a servant. What she saw was a child with sharp eyes and hollow cheeks who hadn't been properly fed or loved in far too long. "Oh, child," she whispered, "when was the last time someone gave you a real meal?" Rebecca didn't answer. She didn't have to. The way she devoured the bread and cold meat said everything. That first night, Martha insisted the girl sleep upstairs in the spare bedroom, not the cramped quarters Samuel had suggested near the kitchen. She even started calling her dear by the time she finished drawing the bath. And just like that, without anyone saying it out loud, the walls of the house began to shift, not physically, but emotionally. There was warmth in the air again, laughter, purpose. In the weeks that followed, Rebecca settled into her new life with the quiet determination of someone who'd never been allowed to just exist. She rose with the sun, helped prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, tended the garden like she'd been born to it. She mended clothes, churned butter, cleaned stalls, and made herself useful in a dozen ways before most girls her age would even be out of bed. But it wasn't just her work ethic that stood out. It was her mind. Samuel noticed it one morning when he caught her watching the ranch foreman weigh feed. She wasn't just looking, she was calculating. Later that night, he handed her a worn copy of an old arithmetic book. "Thought you might like to learn how to balance feed ratios," he said casually. She finished the first 5 chapters before breakfast. From then on, it became a quiet tradition. After the evening chores, Rebecca would meet Samuel in his study, and he'd teach her how to read, how to write, how to think in numbers. She absorbed everything like dry soil drinks the rain. But here's the thing most folks don't understand about kids like Rebecca. Survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about watching, listening, learning, knowing who you can trust and who you can't. For kids who grow up in the cracks of society, intelligence isn't just a gift, it's a weapon. And Rebecca had learned to sharpen hers well before Samuel ever opened a book. Still, for the first time in her life, she had someone who wasn't trying to use her or sell her or silence her. He was teaching her. And Martha Martha wasn't far behind. In fact, the change in Samuel's wife was perhaps even more dramatic than Rebecca's. For years, the sorrow of being childless had dulled Martha's spirit. She kept to herself, rarely smiled, and filled her time with tasks that never touched her heart. But with Rebecca in the house, something came alive again. She taught the girl to cook special recipes. She showed her how to arrange flowers from the garden. She read to her by the fire in the evenings and braided her hair in the mornings. Somewhere along the way, Martha stopped calling her dear and started calling her my girl. And Rebecca? She began to soften. Not in her work, she was still fierce in her dedication, but in her expression, in her posture, in the way she allowed herself to laugh. It was as if a part of her, long buried beneath years of grit and fear, had finally been given permission to breathe. Of course, Samuel saw all of it. He saw the joy return to his wife's eyes. He saw the way Rebecca managed the kitchen as efficiently as any adult. And most of all, he saw the look in her eyes when she read her first full sentence aloud, equal parts pride and disbelief, as though the letters themselves had been hiding from her whole life. "She's a bright girl," Martha said one evening on the porch. "Maybe too bright," Samuel replied, watching Rebecca in the distance as she helped one of the ranch hands doctor a lame horse. "Sometimes I think she's older than her years." "She's had to be," Martha said, "but she's safe now." Safe. It was a small word, but a big promise. And deep down, Samuel wondered if he was one he could truly keep, because there were moments, fleeting, subtle, when he'd catch Rebecca spearing off at the horizon, eyes narrowed, as if she were watching for something, or someone, as if part of her still didn't believe the danger was really behind her. He didn't ask, not yet, but the question hung in the air. Who was Rebecca Sullivan, really? And what had she left behind? For now, though, there was peace. A girl who had never known rest was finding rhythm. A woman who had once given up on motherhood was finding hope. And a man who had spent decades building something with his hands was beginning to understand that the real legacy he'd leave behind might not be the land or the cattle. It might be her. Because sometimes the people who come into your life the most unexpectedly are the ones who give it meaning. And sometimes the child you think you're saving turns out to be the one who saves you. Stay with us, because Rebecca's story is just beginning. And what happens next will test everything they believe about family, loyalty, and the cost of giving someone a second chance.
It had been months since Rebecca Sullivan arrived at the McKinnon Ranch. Months of hard work, quiet evenings, and the slow healing that comes with safety. But no matter how far you travel, no matter how hard you try to start over, some pasts don't stay buried. It was a quiet fall evening when the first crack appeared. Rebecca was seated at the kitchen table, helping Samuel with the ranch ledgers. The numbers were neatly written in her hand, every expense, every sale, every detail of cattle feed and labor wages tracked with precision. She paused, then looked up from the page. "Mr. McKinnon, can I ask you something?" Samuel glanced up from his notes, sensing the weight behind her voice. "Of course." "Mrs. McKinnon," she said carefully, "she wants to adopt me, doesn't she?" The question hung in the air, not with fear, but with clarity. Samuel slowly set down his pen. "What makes you say that?" Rebecca looked down, then spoke with calm certainty. "Little things. The way she talks about the future, the dresses she's ordered for me, how she introduces me to people in town, like I'm already part of the family." She closed the ledger softly. "She's a kind woman, and I'm grateful, but before you make any decisions, I need you to know something about me." Samuel felt a shift in the room, like the stillness before a coming storm. Rebecca took a breath. "I wasn't entirely honest about my past." She met his eyes head on. "My parents did die of fever. That part is true. But after that, I wasn't just living rough. I worked for a man named Garrett Mills." Samuel's blood ran cold. Garrett Mills, a name spoken in whispers, a man who controlled most of Galveston's underworld. Gambling dens, smuggling routes, brothels, and protection rackets. He was as dangerous as they came. "What kind of work?" Samuel asked, though he already dreaded the answer. "Not what you're thinking," Rebecca said quickly. "I was too young for that, but I kept his books, ran messages, watched people. I was useful because I could blend in. People ignored street kids. I listened, I learned, and I remembered everything." Samuel said nothing for a long moment. Then finally, "Why are you telling me this now?" Rebecca hesitated. "Because I think someone's been watching the ranch." Samuel's hand instinctively moved toward the rifle leaning by the wall. "What did you see?" "Yesterday, I was working in the garden. I saw a glint of light in the hills, like sunlight off glass. Someone watching with a scope, maybe. And 2 days ago, I found tracks by the creek. Not your horses, someone else." She looked up, her voice steady. "I didn't want to believe it, but I think Mills might have sent someone." Samuel's instincts, honed from years of dealing with cattle rustlers and droughts, kicked in immediately. He called Tom Bradley, the ranch foreman, that very night. Tom had been with the McKinnons for over a decade, a man of few words and solid judgment. "Set up a watch rotation," Samuel told him. "Day and night. No one rides in or out without us knowing." Tom nodded. "You think someone's coming?" "I don't know, but I'd rather be ready than regret it." That night, Samuel told Martha everything. Rebecca's confession, the name Mills, the signs of surveillance. Martha listened without flinching. Her hands didn't stop stirring the soup. When he finished, she simply said, "Does it change how you feel about her?" Samuel looked in her eyes. "No. If anything, I respect her more. She survived things that would break most grown men." "Then it doesn't change how I feel either," Martha said quietly. "That child has been through enough. If trouble's coming, we face it together." It was a simple statement, but in it lay the deepest kind of love, the kind that doesn't flinch when tested. Later that week, Rebecca found Samuel in the barn and handed him something she'd kept hidden since the day he'd brought her home. A small, leather-bound book, worn but intact. "It's Mills's ledger," she said. Samuel opened it. Inside were names, dates, payment amounts, coded messages, but to someone who understood numbers the way Rebecca did, the meaning was clear. Bribes to city officials, payoffs to law enforcement, shipment records, and debts owed. "Why do you have this?" Rebecca said, "I took it when I left. I told myself it was insurance, but now I think it might be why someone's coming." Samuel stared down at the book in his hands. This wasn't just dirty laundry. This was leverage. Dangerous leverage. Enough to put Mills behind bars if it ever saw daylight, or enough to get a girl killed if it fell into the wrong hands. "We'll protect you," he said finally, "whatever it takes." Rebecca shook her head. "I'm not just worried about me. I'm worried about this ranch, about Martha, about all the people who live here. I brought this danger with me, and I need to help fix it." And right then, Samuel understood something crucial. Rebecca didn't see herself as a victim. She never had. She was a survivor, a fighter. And now she was ready to stand her ground, not just for herself, but for the people she'd come to care about. That night, the McKinnon Ranch didn't just prepare for an attack. It prepared for a reckoning. Spotters were posted at all the high ridges, firearms were checked and loaded, quiet signals were agreed upon. Samuel moved through it all like a general before a battle, but his thoughts kept returning to one simple truth. This wasn't about cattle anymore. It was about family, about trust, about what you're willing to do to protect the people who've become part of your soul. And somewhere, out beyond the hills, a shadow from the past was watching, waiting. But the girl they were coming for? She wasn't a scared orphan anymore. She was part of the McKinnon family now, and she wasn't running.
It was just before dawn when Rebecca woke to the sound of horses. At first, she thought it might have been part of a dream, a fading echo in the gray quiet of early morning. But then she heard it again. Hooves pounding hard against dry Texas dirt. Too many to be coincidence. Too fast. Too urgent. She didn't hesitate. Within seconds, she was out of bed, heart hammering, bare feet silent against the wooden floor as she moved to the window. What she saw made her stomach twist. 6 riders, spread out and closing fast on the ranch house, their silhouettes jagged against the pale orange glow of approaching daylight. Trouble had come to McKinnon Ranch. She ran, straight to Samuel and Martha's room, pounding on the door. "Mr. McKinnon," she said, breathless. "Riders, 6 of them, coming fast." Samuel was already awake. The moment he saw her face, he didn't ask questions. He reached for the rifle by the bed. Martha, pale but calm, threw on her robe and headed down the hall to wake the ranch hands. Years of waiting for a child had made her strong, but these past months with Rebecca, they'd made her fierce. Rebecca took position by the back door, shotgun in hand. Her fingers trembled, but her aim didn't. This wasn't fear, this was resolve. She caught a glimpse of one of the riders as they approached the house, and everything inside her turned cold. It was Jake Winters, the same man who'd tried to corner her in the kitchen months before, the man Samuel had fired without hesitation. But Jake wasn't riding alone. Behind him were others, men Rebecca recognized from Galveston, enforcers from Mills's crew, men who didn't ride unless they were hunting something or someone. Jake's voice rang out from the darkness. "McKinnon, send out the girl and no one gets hurt." From inside the house, Samuel's voice responded, loud and unflinching. "You're trespassing on my land. Ride out now while you still can." Jake laughed, a low, taunting sound. "This ain't about you, old man. It's about the girl. She took something from our employer. We just came to collect." Rebecca's hands gripped the shotgun tighter. She knew exactly what Jake meant. The ledger. The little black book she'd taken from Mills before leaving Galveston. The one filled with names, payoffs, and secrets that could bury powerful men. She'd hidden it in the lining of the dress she wore the day Samuel bought her. Kept it buried, like a relic of a life she wanted to forget. But some things don't stay buried, and now men were willing to kill for it. The first shots came from the east side, 2 of Mills's men trying to force their way into the barn. But Tom Bradley, the ranch foreman, was already in position in the loft, rifle steady. He fired once, then again. The attackers fell back. Glass shattered in the front parlor. Rebecca spun toward the sound. One of the men had broken a window and was halfway inside. Without thinking, she raised the shotgun and pulled the trigger. The blast knocked the man clean out the window, his scream lost in the chaos. From upstairs, Martha's voice echoed down. "Rebecca, are you all right?" "I'm fine," she called back, reloading quickly. For the next 20 minutes, the fight raged. Ranch hands held the barn and the porch. Samuel defended the front door. Rebecca covered the back. Martha kept hot coffee flowing, her hands shaking only when no one was watching. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but not outwilled. Then a pause. Jake's voice came again, this time softer. "I'm coming under a white flag. I want to talk." Samuel hesitated, then stepped onto the porch, rifle still in hand. Jake rode forward, hands raised just enough to keep the illusion of peace. "Simple deal. You give us the girl, we leave. No more trouble." Rebecca stepped out beside Samuel before he could speak. Jake's expression twisted when he saw her, equal parts anger and something darker. "There you are. You've caused a lot of problems, sweetheart." "You caused your own," she said calmly. "What does Mills want? The ledger?" Jake didn't deny it. "You give it back, we walk away. Mills doesn't want you, he just wants his property." Rebecca was quiet, thinking, calculating. Then finally, "All right," she said, "but I want something in return." Jake raised an eyebrow. "You're not exactly in a position to bargain." "Really," she said, gesturing toward the hills. "You're surrounded. You've lost 2 already. You might take this place down, but it'll cost you." Samuel stepped up beside her, backing her without a word. "What do you want?" Jake asked. "A guarantee," Rebecca said. "You get the ledger, you leave. You tell Mills I'm dead. You bring him proof, a piece of my dress stained with blood. He believes I'm gone. He stops hunting." Jake thought about it. It took 10 more tense minutes, but eventually he agreed. Rebecca went inside, retrieved the ledger, and cut a strip of fabric from her old dress. She pricked her hand, let the blood soak in. When she returned, she handed the book and the cloth to Jake. He took them, then looked at her one last time. "You could have had an easy life in the city. Why'd you choose this?" Rebecca looked around, at Samuel, at Martha, at the ranch hands who'd risked their lives for her, at the house that had become a home. "Because this is where I'm free," she said. "This is where I belong." Jake turned his horse, his men followed. And just like that, they were gone, disappearing into the hills like ghosts before sunrise. The ranch stood still, broken glass on the porch, smoke in the air. A silence that wasn't fear, but relief. Rebecca walked back inside and set the shotgun down. Samuel met her with a look of pride and something deeper, something like awe. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I am now," she said, and for the first time in a long time, she meant it. She had fought for her place, not as a servant, not as someone to be pitied, but as a daughter, as a partner, as a protector of the only real family she'd ever known. And they had fought for her too. Because sometimes family isn't about blood. Sometimes it's about the people who stand beside you when the bullets fly.
After the dust settled and the danger passed, the ranch slowly returned to its rhythm, but nothing was quite the same. Rebecca had stood her ground. She defended her new home, and in doing so, she'd earned something far more valuable than safety. She'd earned trust. Not just from Samuel and Martha, but from every ranch hand, every cook, every rider who had watched that young girl face down armed men without flinching. But healing isn't just about survival. It's about deciding where you belong and why. One evening, not long after the attack, the three of them sat together in the warm glow of the fireplace. The air outside had turned crisp, the sky clear with autumn stars. Inside, the room held a stillness that asked for something more to be said. Martha glanced at Samuel, then gently placed her teacup down and turned toward Rebecca. "Sweetheart," she began, her voice steady, "we need to talk about your future." Rebecca looked up from the book in her lap, one of Samuel's old ledgers she'd been practicing with. "What about it?" Martha met her eyes. "You're not a servant here. You haven't been for a long time. And you're not just a guest, either." She hesitated for a second, then continued, "We've been wondering how you'd feel about becoming a true part of this family, officially. Samuel and I, well, we'd like to adopt you." The words lingered in the air, soft but powerful. Rebecca didn't speak right away. She set the book aside, folded her hands in her lap, and looked into the fire. Then she said something that caught both of them off guard. "I'd like that, more than anything. But I want to earn it." Samuel leaned forward, puzzled. "Earn it? Rebecca, you already have." She shook her head gently. "Not enough. I don't want to be adopted just because you feel sorry for me, or because I helped during one fight. I want to learn how to run this place, truly run it. I want to prove that I can build something, not just be taken in." She looked up, eyes fierce with conviction. "And I want to help others like me, children who never had a real home, kids who've been forgotten." There was silence for a moment. Then Samuel spoke, voice low and certain. "You don't have to prove anything, Rebecca. But if that's what you want, we'll help you every step of the way." And that's how a new mission began, not just for Rebecca, but for the entire McKinnon Ranch. From the outside, it still looked like a cattle operation. Wide open pastures, horses trotting past fences, smoke curling from the chimney on cold mornings. But inside something remarkable was taking root. It started small. A letter to a contact in town, a meeting with the local orphan committee, quiet conversations with the church and the county. Then one morning, a wagon arrived carrying a boy of about 12. His name was Eli,
and he hadn't spoken much since his parents died in a factory fire the previous year. He was dirty, thin, and suspicious of everything. But Martha didn't blink. She took him straight to the kitchen, set down a plate of food, and said, "Eat first. We'll talk later." It was the first of many such moments. Over the next year, more children arrived, some abandoned, some orphaned, some simply unwanted. And Rebecca was at the heart of it all. She greeted each child herself. She helped them settle in. She remembered what it was like to arrive with nothing but fear. And perhaps that's what made her different from the others. She wasn't just a caretaker. She was one of them. A survivor, a fighter, a believer in second chances. But this wasn't a charity. It wasn't a rescue mission. It was something far more radical. It was a family. By choice, not by blood. Rebecca worked harder than ever. By day, she managed livestock rotations, supply orders, and weather reports. By night, she studied ranch economics with Samuel, learned negotiation tactics, and taught the other children how to read and write. She was only 15 when she stood before a councilman from Austin and explained how a ranch could double as a home, and how productivity and compassion didn't have to be opposites. By 16, she'd already helped design a system of mentorship on the ranch, where older kids taught younger ones. It gave them purpose, dignity, and a path forward. No one was idle. No one was disposable. And through it all, Samuel and Martha stood beside her, not as saviors, but as equals, as parents, as partners. One night, while walking back from the barn, Rebecca looked up at Samuel and asked the same question that had haunted her since that first day in Galveston. "Why did you think by me?" He stopped walking, thinking for a moment. "I saw something in your eyes, something strong, something that said, 'I'm not done yet.' And I thought, maybe neither am I." Rebecca smiled. "That's fair, because I haven't been since." And she hadn't been. The McKinnon Ranch, under her influence, became more than land and cattle. It became a living, breathing testament to what happens when you believe in broken people, when you give them a safe place to grow, to fall, and to rise again. It wasn't about bloodlines or legacy anymore. It was about choosing each other. And for Rebecca, the girl who once stared down a shotgun barrel to protect a place she didn't even own, this wasn't just home. It was her life's work. And she was just getting started.
5 years had passed since Rebecca Sullivan first stepped off that wagon, thin as a whisper, sharp as a blade, and carrying the weight of a world that had nearly broken her. Now, at 19, she stood tall on the same porch, overlooking a ranch that had become something much bigger than cattle and fences. McKinnon Ranch had grown, not in size, but in spirit. And at its heart stood a young woman who had once been bought for $50 at a labor auction, now running payrolls, negotiating trade deals, and mentoring a new generation of kids just like she once was. What happened in those 5 years wasn't a miracle. It wasn't luck. It was the result of hard work, vision, and one radical idea. What if a cattle ranch could be more than a business? What if it could be a home for the lost, the abandoned, the forgotten? That vision started with Rebecca, and it spread like wildfire. By year 5, McKinnon Ranch had taken in more than 15 children from across Texas. Some came from the streets, others from broken homes. Each one arrived with the same guarded eyes Rebecca once had. But over time, through structure, education, and trust, those eyes softened, brightened, began to look forward. Rebecca didn't just teach them chores. She taught them how to think, how to read numbers, manage livestock, understand supply chains. She walked them through ledgers, then let them run mock deals. She believed in practical skills, but more than that, she believed in self-worth. Because no one had ever told her she was capable, until Samuel and Martha did. Now she was passing that belief forward.
And it wasn't just the children who changed. Samuel and Martha, now in their 50s, had found something deeper than the life they once mourned. Their sorrow for not having biological children had been replaced by something far greater: a chosen family, a living legacy. Rebecca brought in new buyers from Kansas City. She negotiated better prices for beef, diversified feed sources during drought seasons, and built relationships with rail operators. Under her guidance, profits increased nearly 30%. But she never made it about herself. She always pointed back to the mission. One of her earliest ideas was to rotate older kids into leadership roles. If they're going to run their own lives one day, she said, they need to learn how to lead now. Some became foremen. Others helped in bookkeeping. And one girl, Sarah, discovered she had a talent for teaching. She eventually opened a one-room schoolhouse on the property for the younger children. And just when people in town started whispering about that strange ranch taking in strays, the results spoke louder than gossip. Kids who'd once lived on the edge of survival were growing into capable, confident, and compassionate adults. At the 10-year mark, Samuel made it official. They gathered under the big oak tree near the barn. All the kids were there, new ones and old ones. Ranch hands stood shoulder to shoulder with Martha and Tom Bradley, the longtime foreman. Samuel stepped forward with a piece of paper in hand and a smile on his face. Today, we recognize what's already been true for years. Rebecca McKinnon, is now a full partner in this ranch, equal in land, decision-making, and responsibility. There were no fireworks, no champagne, just applause, tears, and a silence filled with pride. Rebecca didn't say much in response, just one sentence. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure this place continues to be what it was for me, a second chance. Over the next 5 years, McKinnon Ranch welcomed more than 60 children. Not all of them stayed. Some left to build new lives in nearby towns. One became a blacksmith, another a nurse. 2 boys, Marcus and Eli, started a freight company and offered jobs to former residents. But they all left with something in common: a sense of identity, a belief that they mattered, a set of skills the world couldn't take from them. What Rebecca had built wasn't charity, it was dignity. And what made it work wasn't money, it was consistency. The kind that says, you are safe here, you are seen, and we expect you to rise. Because expectation is a powerful thing. When someone expects you to fail, you often do. But when someone expects you to become, something shifts. You begin to believe it too. By the time Rebecca turned 24, newspapers from Austin and Dallas were writing stories about the McKinnon model. Ranchers from other parts of the country came to visit, not just to see how cattle were raised, but how children were being restored. One article called it the ranch that raised futures. Another said it was Texas's quiet revolution in compassion. But Rebecca didn't care much for headlines. Most nights she still walked the grounds herself, checked on the younger kids before bed, and met with Samuel every Sunday to review operations. She believed in boots on the ground, and in the quiet moments, she still asked herself the same question Samuel once asked her. What does it mean to leave something better than you found it? For her, the answer had always been the same. It means you choose people, you stand for them, you build with them. And that kind of legacy, it doesn't just change a ranch. It changes the world.
By the spring of 1903, the McKinnon Ranch was no longer just a ranch. It had become something else entirely, something people around the state were calling the McKinnon Miracle. And the girl who once arrived on that dusty land with nothing but a ragged dress and a guarded heart was now a woman with a wedding band on her finger, a ledger in her hands, and a vision that stretched far beyond the pastures she managed. Rebecca McKinnon, now Rebecca Harrison, had married James, the younger brother of Tom Bradley, the ranch foreman who'd once stood beside her during a gunfight. But even in marriage, she kept her promise to herself. This wasn't about giving up her work or settling into the background. If anything, she stepped forward more boldly than ever, because the mission hadn't changed, and neither had the need.
That year, newspapers from Dallas to San Antonio ran headlines about the ranch. A new model for orphan care, one read. Another called it, "Where Cattle and Compassion Grow Side by Side." But most people simply knew it as what it had always been to those who lived there: home. The state of Texas took notice, and not just the local folks. Governor Joseph Sears himself made the trip to Brazos County. He arrived in a black carriage, flanked by members of the Children's Aid Society and two wealthy philanthropists from Austin who were eager to see what made this ranch so different. What they found was not a polished institution with marble floors or white picket fences. It was something far more honest and far more powerful. They found a place where children worked with their hands and learned with their hearts, where they were taught to read, to budget, to farm, and to lead, where respect wasn't demanded, but modeled, and where second chances weren't a slogan, they were the foundation. The governor stood beneath the wide sky, hands behind his back, watching as several children helped saddle horses, check irrigation lines, and tally up inventory. "You call this a miracle?" he asked Rebecca. "No, sir," she replied, steady and soft. "I call it what happens when you give a child the tools to believe in themselves. The miracle is what they do with it." It wasn't an exaggeration either. Over the course of 15 years, more than 60 children had passed through the McKinnon Ranch. More than 90% had gone on to build lives they never dreamed possible. Some started their own businesses. One became a blacksmith in town. Another opened a bakery. Several joined trade schools, others became teachers, and a few even returned to the ranch, not as lost children, but as mentors for the next wave of arrivals. One of them, Marcus Thompson, now 22, stood beside Rebecca that afternoon. When the governor asked what the ranch meant to him, Marcus didn't hesitate. "I was 12 when I got here, didn't trust nobody, thought the world owed me a beating and I was going to beat it back. But she didn't try to fix me. She just gave me a reason to stay, gave me work, purpose, a bed I didn't have to fight for. And slowly, I started believing I could be more than what life had made me." The governor looked from Marcus to Rebecca, then around the ranch. "What you've built here," he said, "this shouldn't be the exception, it should be the model." And that's when it started. The talk of replication, of state funding, of taking the McKinnon approach and planting it like seeds in other parts of Texas and maybe beyond. Rebecca didn't react with pride. She reacted with caution. "It can work," she said, "but only if people understand that this isn't about charity. It's about dignity. These children don't need pity. They need responsibility, consistency, and someone who won't give up on them when they fall short." Because that was the truth. Kids didn't need to be rescued. They needed to be believed in. And belief, when lived out through structure, education, and love, became something far more powerful than rescue ever could be. As the dignitaries toured the property, they saw more than clean bunkhouses and well-fed livestock. They saw how the kids looked Rebecca in the eye, how they asked questions, offered ideas, took initiative. This was no accident. It was leadership. Not from a title, but from a life lived in alignment with purpose. That night, after the guests had gone, the ranch family gathered in the big dining room for Sunday supper. Long tables filled with food, conversation, and laughter. Some kids talked about chores. Others whispered dreams about starting bakeries or becoming trail riders. And Rebecca? She stood at the head of the table beside Samuel and Martha, both now in their 70s, still active, still involved, but letting go a little more each season. Samuel raised a glass. 18 years ago, I bought a girl at an auction thinking I was doing her a favor. But the truth is, she did us a greater one. He turned toward Rebecca. She reminded us that family isn't always something you're born into. Sometimes it's something you build. One child, one day, one lesson at a time. The room went quiet. Then Rebecca spoke. "When I first came here, I didn't believe in hope. I thought it was something rich folks made up to keep poor folks quiet. But what I found was something stronger than hope. Commitment. Commitment to people, to a purpose, to a second chance." She looked around at the kids, at the faces she knew and the ones just beginning their journey. "This ranch isn't perfect, but it's proof that when we choose each other, really choose each other, nothing is impossible. That was the night the McKinnon miracle stopped being just a story. It became a movement, and Rebecca Harrison, the girl who'd once been sold for $50, became its voice, its heart, and its proof that you don't have to be born into greatness to build something great. You just have to care enough to start.
25 years had passed since the day Rebecca Sullivan stood on a splintered auction platform in Galveston, Texas. A 14-year-old girl with nothing to her name but fierce eyes, worn shoes, and a heart that refused to break. And now, in the same study where Samuel McKinnon had once taught her how to read cattle ledgers and calculate feed costs, Rebecca Harrison sat beside a sharp-eyed 13-year-old girl named Elena, teaching her to do the very same thing. Elena had only been at the ranch for 6 months. She was quick, curious, and more guarded than most. But Rebecca recognized the look in her eyes. It was the same one she used to see in the mirror, a look that said, "I want to believe I belong, but I'm afraid to hope." And that, more than anything, was why Rebecca never stopped showing up. "All right," she said gently, sliding the ledger across the desk. "If we sell the cattle in Kansas City instead of Fort Worth, how much more per head?" Elena leaned in, tapping the numbers with her pencil. "About $3.50 more, but we'd have to pay more for rail transport." Rebecca smiled. "Exactly. So what does that tell us?" "That we shouldn't just chase the higher price. We have to watch the timing and balance the cost." "That's right," Rebecca said. "Profit is never just about the number on the check. It's about understanding the whole picture." She paused, then added softly, "That applies to life too, not just business." Outside the window, the ranch buzzed with the sounds of children laughing, horses being led out to pasture, and ranch hands calling across the fields. The McKinnon Ranch, after nearly 3 decades of evolution, still stood strong, not just as a business, but as a beacon. Samuel and Martha were now well into their 70s, still sharp, still deeply loved, but slower than they once were. Time had etched its lines into their hands and their pace, but they watched with quiet pride as the ranch and their vision lived on in the women they once took in with little more than faith and a hunch. Rebecca and her husband James had gradually taken over the full responsibility of operations, not just the cattle and the land, but the children, the mentorship programs, the educational structure. Every decision passed through hands shaped by both experience and heartache. And still, Rebecca never forgot where it all started. One evening, as the sun set in bands of gold across the Texas hills, Elena asked a question that froze Rebecca for a moment. "Why do you do all this?" she asked quietly. "You could have a quieter life. You don't have to help kids like me." Rebecca looked at the girl for a long moment, then answered with a voice steady and full of truth. "Because someone gave me a chance when I didn't deserve it, and that changed everything. So now, I give it back." And maybe that's the deepest kind of legacy. Not land, not wealth, not even reputation, but the decision to pass on what was once barely held together. Over the years, dozens more children had come through the ranch. Some stayed a season, others a lifetime. Many had gone on to start businesses, build families, or create homes that carried the same values they'd learned on this very land. A few even returned, just like Rebecca once had, to help teach the next wave. But Rebecca knew something that few people talk about when it comes to legacy. It's not about how long your name lasts after you're gone. It's about what kind of person your love helped shape. She never aimed to be a legend. She just wanted to build a place where people could heal and grow, a place where children who had been forgotten could become people who led, served, and thrived. Some days that work looked like teaching kids to balance books. Other days it looked like sitting on the porch and simply listening. And always it looked like believing in people before they believed in themselves.
As Samuel watched Rebecca from a distance one afternoon, helping a group of boys mend a broken fence, he leaned over to Martha and whispered, "You know, I thought I was saving her that day in Galveston." Martha smiled, her hand resting over his. "But she saved all of us," she said. Later that night, as the family gathered around the long dining table for Sunday supper, a tradition that never wavered, Rebecca took a moment to look around. Dozens of faces, young and old, some new, some familiar, all shaped by one unshakable truth. Family is not always found in blood. Sometimes it's built in the quiet, ordinary moments of trust, kindness, and showing up. And in that, Rebecca saw her purpose, clear as day. The same way Samuel once saw something in her eyes that told him she wasn't done, she now looked into the eyes of others and saw the same fire, because her life had taught her something unshakable. One chance, given with sincerity, can change everything, not just for a child, but for generations. And so with each new arrival, each lesson taught, each hand held steady through hard times, Rebecca kept the promise she made to herself all those years ago, to be more than what the world expected of her, to turn survival into stewardship, and to ensure that no child who stepped onto that ranch would ever feel like they were disposable again. As the stars blinked to life above the hills and the day faded into memory, Rebecca sat with Elena one more time before bed. "Do you think I could run a place like this one day?" the girl asked. Rebecca didn't hesitate. "I think you could build something even better."
It started with a transaction, $50 exchanged in a crowded warehouse in Galveston, Texas. A man named Samuel McKinnon stood in the back, desperate to bring purpose back into a life that had grown too quiet, too still. In front of him stood a girl named Rebecca, 14 years old, malnourished, barefoot, and guarded. The moment their eyes met, something shifted. Neither one could have known it, but that moment would spark a transformation that would ripple across generations. What followed was not just the story of a ranch. It was the story of redemption, resilience, and the extraordinary power of human connection. You see, one of the most powerful truths this story teaches us is this: sometimes we don't rescue others, we rescue each other. Samuel gave Rebecca shelter, food, and work, but what she gave him in return was something deeper. She revived a sense of purpose in a man who thought his best days were behind him. She brought light into a house that had been dimmed by years of childlessness and silent disappointment. It wasn't one-sided, it was mutual rescue. And isn't that often how real healing happens? Not through grand gestures or sweeping heroism, but through the quiet, daily acts of showing up for one another. Through listening, teaching, believing. Over time, Samuel and his wife Martha didn't just come to love Rebecca. They saw in her what no one else had taken time to see: potential. And Rebecca? She didn't run from her past. She faced it, learned from it, transformed it. And most importantly, she used it to build something stronger, kinder, and more enduring than anything she had ever known. But if there's one message this story leaves us with above all, it's this: family is not always about blood. It's about choice, about commitment, about who stays when things get hard, and who believes in your future more than they fear your past. The McKinnon Ranch became living proof of that idea. They didn't just take in orphans, they raised young minds. They didn't just feed children, they invested in them. They didn't just save lives, they handed back dignity. Over the decades, more than 60 children found their way to that ranch. Many came broken, angry, silent. But one by one, they learned to speak, to trust, to lead. Why? Because someone gave them a chance. Sometimes that's all it takes. And that leads us to another theme so central to this journey: the power of opportunity. Rebecca was a street kid, technically property. She had no inheritance, no title, no roadmap. But given just one consistent environment, with education, structure, and respect, she didn't just survive, she thrived. And then she gave that same chance to others. It's easy to forget how much potential lives inside a child, especially one who's been discarded by the world. But this story reminds us, children are not broken things. They are seeds. And when planted in the right soil, with care and patience, they don't just grow, they bloom. Which brings us to the next great pillar of this story. The value of education, not just academic, but emotional and practical. Rebecca didn't just learn to read, she learned to lead. She understood markets, cattle yields, weather patterns, and people. She used math to track finances, literature to connect with children, and ethics to make decisions that would shape lives. And here's the truth, we don't always need to build giant institutions to change the world. Sometimes a kitchen table, a shared meal, and a conversation under a porch light are enough. Kindness can be revolutionary. So can consistency. So can showing up. One of the most moving things about this story is that it never needed a hero in a cape. Just a tired man who saw a child worth saving. Just a woman who gave a hungry girl a warm bath and a clean bed. Just a teenager who turned her pain into purpose. It reminds us that no matter where we've come from or how broken our beginnings may be, we are not defined by what happened to us, but by what we choose to build in response. Rebecca could have disappeared into bitterness, but she chose to rebuild. Samuel could have continued living with quiet regret, but he chose to open his door. And together, they didn't just change their lives, they rewrote the lives of others. For decades, quietly, humbly, without asking for recognition. So maybe the lesson here is simple but profound. The past does not get the final say. We do. Every time we decide to trust again, every time we choose to help someone instead of judging them, every time we turn pain into purpose, we write a new ending. That's what Rebecca did. That's what Samuel and Martha did. That's what McKinnon Ranch stands for. And that's what each of us can do in our own corner of the world, whether we're ranchers, teachers, parents, mentors, or simply someone willing to believe in another person when it's hardest. Because in the end, this story was never just about cattle or ledgers or land. It was about what happens when we decide deliberately, wholeheartedly to love, to lead, and to give someone the chance we wish we had. That's not just the story of Rebecca. It's the story we all have the power to write every single day.